What's up guys, Fedor Holz here with Pokercode, and today I want to share my top 5 spots where they always have it, so don't call them down there. This video will be instructive from both sides, because on the one side, you maybe can find some good bluff spots because people also tend to overfold there. But on the other side, and that's going to be my main focus, is to not call people down in those spots because they just have way too strong of a range in hands and they just don't like bluffing them. Let's start with spot number 1, and this is on board pairing runouts. This can actually be in a variety of different scenarios: single raised pots, in position, out of position. Generally, when the board pairs, and let's say there was a c-bet, people just don't really like bluffing. We take an example of a board of queen 7 deuce rainbow, and there's a c-bet and a call, and then there's a queen on the turn. This is an under bluffed spot, so generally people have stronger hands in this spot. I overfold already on the turn when they c-bet. Or an even stronger scenario is when it's, let's say, queen 7 deuce 4 and then a queen on river. That's also a spot where people really don't like bluffing. Just from a psychological standpoint, just feels like, oh, he has a queen too often, he never folds a queen, he also maybe bluff catches another hand, so it's just a spot that people don't like to bluff, and therefore they have a strong hand really often. So that's number 1 of the spots where I think people just very often have it, and you should adapt accordingly and overfold the spot. So keep that in mind. Spot number 2 is triple barrels in 3-bet pots. This might sound fancy now, but let me break it down. We open raise, we get 3-bet, and then they start betting flop, betting turn, betting river. They have too strong of a range. And let me explain why. Because already most of our opponents 3-bet a little too tight in position. So they 3-bet jacks and queens and kings and aces, so they 3-bet their strong hands, but they don't 3-bet enough bluffs. So already there it starts that they have a little bit too strong of a range. C-betting on the flop, but after they did that, they c-bet too little of their bluffs on the turn already. They c-bet all their strong hands, but they have too few bluffs, and then they c-bet too few of their bluffs on the turn. So after that combination of too strong of a preflop range, too strong of a turn c-betting range, their triple barreling range becomes very strong. People just have it too often, they're too nutted, and we want to overfold against this because they do not get there with the bluffs on the river. So this is my second spot to really watch out for. Let's get to point number 3, where I want to be talking about raises. River raises and turn raises. And let's start with the turn. A lot of turn raises, especially check raises, are very, very strong, way too strong. And that's why we want to put this in this category, because if we get check raised on the turn, there's particular board structures where people just do not find the bluffs. And especially when the turn is bedoogie, so no flush draw, and when it's disconnected, because there you have to find some weird check raise bluffs, and most players don't find them. So what you will see is it's going to be some delayed traps on the flop. So if they have flopped a set or a 2-pair and now raise it, or if they have turned something. Actually, you don't get raised very often in these spots, and when you get raised, it's just very, very often a turn set or a turn 2-pair or a turn straight or whatever is possible on the turn. So just be very careful in those particular spots that when there's not a good intuitive bluff that you can find, then it's mostly a strong hand. So be very wary against those turn raises. And for the river raises, counts the same also there, especially when it goes, he checks back the turn, then you bet the river, and then he raises you on the river after he checked back the turn. That's very often a spot where they just have improved on the river. So they have river the set or river the 2-pair or improved in some other way. But that's something to be really cautious for. It will not happen often, but when it happens, they just very often have it. So be cautious there, make those hero folds. I promise you they're gonna be good very often. Let's jump right into spot number 4. And those are when our villains, our opponents, have to turn pocket pairs into bluffs. And there's particular spots that are gonna happen very often is when there's an early position open, and let's say you defend in the big blind. And in this scenario, let's take a king, queen, 10 board. So early position open, we defended in a big blind. Now our opponent has to find a lot of bluffs with under pairs, actually with small pocket pairs, because he has such a strong opening range already that these are his preferred bluffs. bluffs. They don't seem extremely intuitive because, you might be able to check it down, see a showdown, but actually those are your best bluffs. They have 2 outs to make a pretty strong hand, and they're pretty much at the bottom of his range. If your opponent doesn't find these bluffs, he just has way too strong of a range and generally too strong of a betting range. So be really cautious when you're in the big blind and you face an early position open, so a stronger range. And there are these board structures, especially high X, where he's supposed to bluff these under pairs. And if you think he doesn't do that, then be really cautious, overfold, and just don't try to fight back too much because his range is just way too strong. A second little addition there is there's also a lot of spots where your opponent has to turn pairs into bluffs. Let's say we get to the river and it went c-bet call, check on the turn, and then we are on the river and all the draws get there. So the flush draw gets there, maybe a gut shot gets there. This is a spot where the big blind in that scenario actually has to bluff pairs on the river. A lot of players don't find these. So also be cautious for that, is when everything gets there on the river and your opponent is probably not bluffing the right amount of pairs and turning them into bluffs. Be really cautious there because he has all the flushes, he has some straights, he has some stronger hands. So if he doesn't find the bluffs, then what happens? He just has too strong of range. Also something we want to be careful for. So generally, when people have to turn non-intuitive pairs into bluffs, be really cautious there because generally that means they just have too many strong hands. All right, now let's get to the 5th spot. Something that actually only counts for low and mid stakes, because on high stakes it's not the case. So there's a disclaimer, and it's 4-card flush boards, which means let's say we have a Jack 9 5 board with 2 spades, and then it runs out 4 of spades, deuce of spades. That's generally a spot that is very, very under bluffed, especially on the river. People do not find the amount of bluffs with their weak hands, with their worse than queen high hands, where almost every hand is a bluff, and a bluff for a really big sizing sometimes as well. Very difficult to find opponents on smaller stakes that find these bluffs also for the bigger sizing. So be really careful there when you face a big bet more than, let's say, half pot on the river with a 4-card flush on the board. Generally they always have it. Not a great spot to bluff catch on smaller and mid stakes. I would say this goes as high as maybe $100, $200 buy-ins. On high stakes, people are really aware of this, and I would say they find the bluffs. They're very much looking forward to win these pots. But on smaller stakes, this is going to be something that will save you a lot of money, so be careful in those 4-card flush spots. Let's sum it up. The 5 spots where I would say they always have it or have it way too often. Number 1, on board pairing runouts, especially when the river pairs, highly underbluffed spot. Number 2, when they triple barrel in 3-bet pots. Number 3, versus river raises and turn check raises. Number 4, where they have to turn pairs or pocket pairs into bluffs. And number 5, on 4-card flush runouts. Some of my top spots where I think population highly underbluffs, and this counts especially for low and mid stakes. It's going to be all about making those disciplined laydowns. If you guys want to learn about my favorite bluff spots, then you got to check out my other video I did on this topic. And if you want to support me, which I'd highly appreciate, then leave a subscribe for the channel. See you guys soon.